Welcome to the HReSource podcast, a series designed specifically for business owners and executives who want to better understand people to increase productivity and performance. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the HReSource podcast. In this episode, we meet Felicity Hannah, who's a freelance print and broadcast journalist. She writes regularly for The Times, Independent, Mirror, and a regular contributor to the BBC News website. The BBC connection is one where I think you'll probably make your connection with her name and no doubt her voice, because she regularly covers presenting spots on Wake Up to Money on BBC Radio 5 Live and as a host on Moneybox on Radio 4. Unsurprisingly then, Fliss has a passion for consumer affairs and business and personal finance. But who knew she also had a passion for Lego? It's true, and we'll find out a bit more about that. Fliss is also a very busy mum. She has 3 boys under the age of 10 and a 4-legged friend in the shape of a dog. And those sons, I'm sure, were very proud of mum last year when she came home with not 1, but 2 awards for her broadcast journalism. So if you want to find out a little bit more about Fliss, you can listen to the podcast, and you can also check out her website, felicityhannah.co.uk, and you can also find her on Twitter at Felicity Hannah. This is a very interesting conversation where we look at the current mood of the nation and what we think might well be life beyond lockdown.
I'm delighted to welcome to the HReSource podcast, broadcaster, journalist, and all-round Wake Up to Money person who I've become very familiar with in terms of her broadcasting in that particular medium, Felicity Hannah.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
And one of the things that I've got to say first and foremost, we had a brief chat just a second ago, is lockdown life. Quite often when I'm asking a guest to talk about that, they talk about the fact that everything's changed, everything's upside down. But you say, I think you'd like to share this, what you were talking about, the change for you is not so much that your working circumstances have changed and it's the same, but it's more those around you.
Yeah, it's really odd actually. I've been working from home for about a decade and I've got used to it. You know, I'm comfortable with it. I know what I'm doing. I can manage that kind of balance of the temptation to do housework, to put off deadlines. You know, I'm on top of that. I can do it. And then suddenly everybody in the country, every office worker in the country is working from home, and it's, you know, everybody's sort of talking about the challenges and how they're getting on, and it's really been my life most of my adult career. The big challenge for me actually is having to share my home working space. So I'm actually coming to you today from my 9-year-old son's bedroom. I'm surrounded by Lego mechs, among other things, because my husband is in a meeting downstairs and I think that he's decided his meeting is more important. So he's in our sort of open plan office space. So I've had to come up here. But yes, working from home, I really like it. And I'm quite interested in how rapidly things have changed with this pandemic. You know, it's gone from being sort of people doing it 1 day a week to just suddenly doing it full time. And I'm amazed at how many different industries have found that they can make it work, whereas before they thought, definitely can't.
Yeah, in my own personal circumstances, it's something that I sent a tweet into to yourself and Readiness for a Wake Up to Money when you were talking about this particular subject. I took a picture and it was of my wife runs a ballet school. And my office, which we're in now, is several days a week after 4 o'clock. Oh, wait, you're out of here. It's now a ballet studio. So that's what we need to do. But I have a bone to pick with you because you actually called her my daughter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's not the actual first time that's happened. Sometimes when she's on a Saturday, she starts at 9:30 and runs all the way through. And obviously, I must have been looking particularly haggard. Oh, it's just my normal.
I assumed it was a.
No. Yeah, it's quite okay. But I came in with a cup of tea, and afterwards, she was talking to one of the children in the class, and they said, "It's nice your dad brings you cups of tea." So actually, face to face, you know, I think it is a bit of a joke between us, anyway. But yeah, she's adapted brilliantly. I mean, for me, it's been inspirational to take what is very much a face-to-face, very social, very active occupation, which is being a teacher and being in an active and growing, fast-growing ballet school, to then find, well, you can't do that anymore. And she's had all the bits in between as well about the socially distanced teaching while she's actually physically with them. And it's not been the best for her, not been the greatest in terms of initially, how do I do this? She wasn't that keen on Zoom, but has now taken a view that actually it's probably a better way to go because she can see students on screen. And it's amazing how they adapt, how they're finding in little spaces, but they're able to do the classes.
I've been so impressed actually by so many people who, as you say, teach physical things. My boy's karate teacher, he's been doing Zoom karate lessons, which I won't say that they work as well as face-to-face karate classes because he can't move their arms and move their legs and show them what they ought to be doing. But yeah, it gets us through this time, and it kind of keeps their interest and keeps them feeling like what they do is karate rather than having a year-long break where then they have to try and get back to it and feel like they haven't been keeping up with it. So yeah, I'm hugely impressed by everybody who's managed to move their stuff online. I did an online wine and cheese night, which again, it is amazing what people have managed to shift online. And it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it gets us through.
Yeah. And in general terms, this conversation, I want to talk about the mood of the country and how we are coping with our circumstances, and hopefully being positive and optimistic, moving through out of more worrying pandemic terms with the vaccination coming to the fore. I get mine tomorrow, by the way. My vaccination.
Oh, congratulations! Yeah, I'm very jealous.
I managed to bring the appointment forward because the GP got in touch with me, and it's the 23rd of March. So it's exactly 12 months on. I am getting my jab. And, I thought I was doing really well because my age group fell into that category. Only to turn out that my wife suddenly got an offer as well, and now she's having hers done before mine. It's like, how dare that happen? But I think it'd be really interesting for listeners to hear a little bit about Felicity's sort of early life and how you found yourself in the role you have now. Because I understand you went to Edinburgh University and your degree was philosophy.
That's a really useful degree. Don't pretend that's not a useful degree. Everybody needs philosophers. Oh, yes. So I studied philosophy at Edinburgh Uni just because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and had an incredible 4 years thinking about thinking and probably thinking about drinking and not much else. So I had the best university job. I worked as a ghost tour guide. So Edinburgh's got this.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
I haven't done that yet. I've worked in Edinburgh.
Oh, you've not?
I've got to do it. Yeah.
You really do. Some of the ghost tours there are absolutely fantastic. And we used to go into the South Bridge, sort of underground vaults. You can turn the torch off and just leave your group there in the dark and tell them terrifying stories. And honestly, if there was money in ghost tour guiding, I would still be doing it today. It was the absolute best job I've ever had. And then my sort of journalism career was I think relatively slow starting. I wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't want to live in London, and that has been previously a real challenge. I think it's becoming easier now. So I worked for a price comparison site. I edited a government facing magazine that I could sort of do from Manchester, and then I had my first baby coming up for 10 years ago, and decided that I would quit all my jobs and go freelance, because that way I could steer my career a bit more the way I wanted to. And that was the moment that I began to actually start writing for national newspapers and specializing in what particularly interested me, which was personal finance, business journalism, consumer affairs. And I built a reputation there. Sorry,
Fliss. What sparked that interest in personal finance?
So I think I came of age around the time of the 2008 financial crisis, and I was that was the time where I was writing this defense magazine, sort of aimed at public servants. That was, I won't name it, but it was essentially sort of what bomb, and I didn't feel like I wasn't very interested in the subject matter, and I didn't feel like I was contributing anything particularly useful. I was just sort of there to do the words. And then I remember watching people queuing up outside Northern Rock on the news, and thinking there is nothing that underpins all our lives more than personal finance. There is nothing that could be more important in terms of a huge number of people than conveying and communicating what's happening to their money. And so that was the moment that I knew that's exactly what I wanted to do. But it took me a few more years, and I began writing for various websites, and some quite big websites like Yahoo and MSN, and then sort of gradually building up from that to writing for newspapers, and from there into broadcast.
And how did that leap to broadcasting happen? Or was it a leap, or was it a sort of a natural progression?
No, it was a huge leap, and I'm hugely fortunate in that I have just consistently met people who have taken a punt on me and given me an opportunity and a chance. So the team, the BBC team in Salford, they were looking for freelance producers, and I had absolutely no broadcast experience, none at all. But I went along and I met one of the bosses there, and she agreed to train me as a producer, and I worked as a producer, so behind the scenes, for about a year. And then they said, well, we quite like the stories that you're bringing, and we'll put you on air, and once a week or once every 2 weeks you can bring an original story and present it on the radio. And I did that for about a year, and then they sort of let me start presenting the Wake Up to Money show when the main presenter wasn't available or was off. And it's sort of built up from there. Then I spilled over into doing Money Box on Radio 4, and I've done a File on 4 documentary. And of course, because I'm this odd fish, I'm not a BBC employee, I'm a freelancer. So I also I'm quite often a BBC guest as well as being a BBC presenter. So I'll be a guest on BBC Breakfast talking about a personal finance topic, or even other stations and TV channels. I've been sort of all over the place. ITN, Channel 5. I go on LBC. Anyone will have me. I'll come and have a chat to you.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the way that you could assume that the BBC and other corporations might work is that they have a bank of broadcasters of talent that they will use, and there will almost be this exclusion around them. But I think that's an area where there's been a little bit of trouble, isn't there? Because I'm going to go into the technicalities of it, but this wonderful thing called IR35, which means you set up a separate company to be able to perform yourself as a sort of quasi freelancer, but ultimately you are part of, and then you become into this whole argument about the gig economy as well. What is your role? What is your raison d'etre? Who do you belong to? Nobody, to be honest, but who do you actually work with on a regular basis?
And that is a problem for so many people. But I think I worked out that last year I had, 20 different clients that I worked for or wrote for or broadcast for. So I'm definitely as freelance and as gig economy as they come.
And that adds spice in terms of the work you're doing as well, and the people you're working with, and adds to the experience. So that's all good. I think I also read somewhere that I'm not sure whether you've produced it yet, and forgive me if I've not come across it, but you were in the middle of creating a novel. Does that happen?
Oh, many novels. I have written I have written a book that has not been published. My first novel was a young adult novel about demonic terrorists, as you do, and but it was a real learning curve. Actually, I have a literary agent, and she's fantastic. I haven't written anything for her yet, but she took my first novel. She told me kind of where it had gone wrong, because it's actually, I just sat down and written it, and actually you need to think about the 3-act structure and the beats of the book and these things that I had instinctively half followed, but I hadn't actually thought about and followed. I had just literally sat down and churned out a story that interested me. So now, with everything that I've learned from writing that, I am working on other projects, but nothing published yet.
It's quite a different task, isn't it? Because I copywriting and headlines and stuff like that, and writing, I quite fancy my chances of that. I think I'm quite good at it. Equally, I've had a couple of books published, but business books, which are quite sort of dry and structured anyway. So, and they're not a novel length, so they're quite straightforward things to do. But I also have novel inside. But it is a much harder for me personally. I think it's a much harder process, because you do have to consider constantly putting yourself in the shoes of the reader, of how are you creating something that's going to draw them in and hold them for the story. You might have a great story, but if you don't keep them on that journey, they're going to drop off, I think. Especially if
it's really interesting.
Online.
It is really interesting because I write to entertain myself. You know, I love writing, and I like to create, and so a lot of the creative writing that I do isn't intended to be published or to go anywhere. I will sit down and tell myself a story through my laptop, and trying to sort of make the leap to, okay, how do I actually present a competently structured book? That is a very, very different thing. But there's so many online resources. I have learned so much just in the last few months, and I think that over lockdown, I think a huge number of people will have written their first novel and be going through that process. I think a lot of people who are furloughed probably decided they would sit down and write the novel. Maybe we'll have a whole influx of lockdown books.
I'm sure of it, and a lot of creative content with people having more time to think about these things, be it novels, be it albums, be it, you know, whatever it might be, plays. What part of HReSource as a community, we're a small but we're a growing, fast-growing community, and we have a group within the community that actually is called Business Insights 22. And the idea around that is that I wanted to tap into exactly those individuals who started off with lockdown with a to-do list and said, I'm going to write a novel, or I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to share more importantly, I'm going to share some of my experience in business, and haven't yet got around to doing that. So that Business Insights group is a collective collaboration to ensure that people come together, they share their content, and we have a topic each month. And it's business related, and we focus on various things. February was finance. It doesn't have to be literature, it just happened that way. But each month we have something, and you can go back to January was well-being. We can go back to that and populate it. But they're the chapters. So each month is a chapter. We get to the end of the year, and then the small amount of money that they pay in terms of the subscription for that goes towards the publishing. We have a multimedia production, which is actually going to hopefully help businesses further coming through the whole COVID process, which is what it's about. That's my little cunning plan. But I think what I was trying to do was tap into a lot of that pent up sort of creative and, I suppose, thoughts that people were having about, right, I need to do something now. I want to make use of this time. And they probably got part way with it, but haven't quite done it yet.
I think there was a lot of pressure on people, particularly in the first lockdown. I mean, not on me, because I was working from home. I have 3 children, so I was balancing and juggling all that working from home, and then I was getting these marketing emails that were saying, like, what are you going to do with all your spare time? And I think I've got no spare time. I've never worked so hard in my life. But people who did have spare time, people who were furloughed or perhaps had older children, I think there was a huge amount of pressure, like, right, go and improve yourselves, go and learn a new language or learn an instrument or build a website or write a book. And actually, I think we should have all given ourselves a bit more of a break, because we were just in survival mode at that point. We were in this sort of shocking situation. I think there was a lot of unrecognized grief. I think they were grieving for normal times and hadn't really realized it. And then there was this pressure that not only should we be coping and dealing with this totally weird situation, but we should also be improving ourselves and come out with a degree the other side. And I think that was a lot of pressure.
One of my biggest challenges was Zoom, was what we're doing now. I mean, a lot of our listeners will just be listening to the podcast, but also we're recording the video. And I had a real problem with that. I don't know where I sit in terms of introvert or extrovert, but I quite like meeting people. I like going out, I'm quite sort of outgoing. But stick me in front of a video screen with a number of people, and it doesn't have to be anything particularly formal, structured, or high-powered. I mean, it could be the family quiz on a Sunday. And I'll make an excuse to go and start tea, because I'm getting better at it now. But one of the things I decided was I have to get over myself, because this could be a format in which we communicate for quite some time to come. And it's one of the drivers that got me to doing this, because I felt if I don't have something that I regularly have to check in with people I don't necessarily know that well, so I've got to communicate with them. So this is thoughts. You are part of my therapy, Felicity.
Well, I'm glad to be helpful.
But I think that's with a lot of people as well have found this type of communication quite difficult. Now, I did hear there are different ways around this, and I heard a fascinating piece on one of your Wake Up to Money programs about virtual reality and how that's
really interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not very good at virtual reality. I get well, my husband spends quite a lot of time in his VR headset now, and so he's quite used to it. So he had the sort of the movement turned up quite high, which apparently you can adjust it. I don't really know, but it was one of the first times that I had really used it was to attend a work meeting in virtual reality. Not one of my work meetings, but because I was researching this story for Wake Up to Money, and I felt so nauseous every time I sort of tried to move around the room. You just get the motion sickness, so horrific.
Yeah, motion sickness that it can cause.
But I think you can adjust it. I think that I had a particularly bad experience, but it was so interesting to be in a work meeting again, where you could, because with Zoom, one person talks at a time, and that's it. And that can be really hard because that's not how meetings, especially creative meetings, work. You interrupt each other, you talk over each other, you break off into little groups, and you can't do any of that in Zoom. And I think that's killed a lot of the very, very creative chatter that's necessary for any industry and any business. But in VR, you can stand in the middle of the room and look at all the different conversations happening, or you can move away and other people sort of quiet down and you have a chat with somebody in a corner. It was very, very similar to being in the same room as each other. Not as good, but very, very similar. And I suspect that if that technology had been more advanced, that might have been the technology that we all turned to rather than Zoom. And it might still be the technology that we all turn to just for meetings in the future. I wouldn't be surprised.
It's almost, what were the terms you were using? People like blended and hybrid, this sort of different way of working together that uses other forms of technology that we might become more familiar with. I saw there was a picture, I think it was the picture you shared with us. It looked a little bit like a social gathering of people that had sort of gone past, that was celebrating their achievements on the Wii Fit. It was like,
yeah.
They were all that sort of shape. My Wii Fit character looked like, a baked potato on top of a sort of a larger lump of mass body. It was just not very good. Because it takes your sort of BMI, doesn't it? And it created this strange weird shape. I didn't think I was.
I prefer though I prefer that virtual reality experience where you are all these sort of weird cartoony shapes with hands but no arms. I preferred that to some of the other VR games. I did a VR boxing game where a very realistic looking human comes swinging punches at you, and I couldn't do it. I ended up sitting down on the floor like, I can't do it. So yeah, I prefer my VR quite cartoony.
Yeah, and in terms of the approach that businesses are taking to, now we're thinking about getting back into the working environment. I mean, maybe not for the likes of you and I, but for other people who will be having offices, and the people who run the businesses who've got bricks and mortar are expecting people to go back. But we're getting a mixture, aren't we, of views. You know, we've got Goldman Sachs, Mr. Solomon saying it's an aberration, this whole idea that, you know, now we're all going to work from home. You know, get yourselves back to work. He's had 10% of his workforce that have been, you know, working in the offices. The rest, everybody's been working from home. And then you've got other organizations that are encompassing it and saying, look, we are in this situation. We're going to, I think, is it Reach? Put out that their workforce, I think pretty much the majority of the workforce is now going to be working from home.
Yes, really, really interesting. But then Reach have an office at Canary Wharf, and you think that must be such a huge expense to manage.
My daughter works there. She works for the Express. So, you know, it's something we've become aware of. And it's not everybody has a lovely office with space and time and no interruption to be able to just concentrate and do work. Point of fact, I think at the moment, my daughter's going through a period where in a particular flats, they're going through one of these refurbishment things. There's drilling and there's banging and there's all sorts of things going on. You know, that's difficult to be able to then find yourself concentrating on, especially if it's going on for a period of time. So yes, there are options available, I think, to what they're talking about now in what they're offering them. So there is a room to meet, and you'll be able to book your time there. But getting the balance right, I think you've got to look at the human in the middle of this. You know, I think we are social creatures. You know,
I think that when lockdown finishes, this will be a lot easier. So when I'm working from home normally, my gym, and in normal times before COVID, my gym has a lovely, and I realize I'm very, very lucky to have a lovely gym, but my gym has a lovely home working space. And it's away from the rest of the gym, and there's comfy chairs and just other people working, and you can go and get a coffee, and that's very nice. And I think that libraries and coffee shops, I think that could be part of what transforms sort of the high street. I think we don't want to, if you look at young people in particular, where they're, some friends of mine were working in their bedrooms throughout the pandemic. One of them had the ironing board set up as a desk because she didn't have it. She was sitting on the bed, and you think this is not good for your work. It's not good for your back. It's not good for any of that. But once things start to unlock, I think that we'll be finding people are seeking out pleasant places to work, and that'll be good for the high street, and I think good for the individuals.
Yeah, I mean, the repurposing of an awful lot of retail space is certainly going to be one opportunity, because and a lot of the commercial space, we're going to have to find a way in which we work through this. I want to just have a touch on the mood, if you like, of people generally, and the things that have caused concern. I'm personally I know that a lot of your colleagues will live in this situation, a part of the excluded group, which means that I didn't qualify for any of the government support. And I took an active part of joining that community on Facebook. And you read of some horrific stories of businesses that have just gone, relationships that have broken down, some really quite dark moments that a lot of people have faced. And it's somewhere in the region of 3 million people. I don't want to touch on the politics of that, because what I want to touch on is finding support and help for people. And it's actually Debt Awareness Week. So this week, one of the issues that I've looked into this, and it's identified that actually, and I'm not surprised, 7 out of 10 people just don't talk about it at all. But there's another statistics and research that's undertaken recently saying that 82% of people who say that they talked about it openly with somebody felt so much better about it. Shocker, surprise. So we need to try and find a way, I think, to be less, and especially, I think there's a lot of maleness involved in these problems as well. Nobody wants to admit to the fact that actually they could be in debt, or they might be struggling to keep their business going, or to pay for their staff, or to whatever the challenges might be. What's your view on that? And given your experience in consumer journalism, finance journalism, where do you see people at this stage?
I've been really impressed by a number of online communities that have sort of either formed in this crisis or just really come into their own in this crisis. So I think the Excluded are a really good example. I've seen on Facebook and other social media platforms the incredible support they have provided to each other, the sort of emotional support, separate to any campaigning that they've been doing and organising that they've been doing. They have been providing quite an extraordinary amount, I think, of hand-holding for each other, and counselling to each other, and reassurance to each other. And I have been very, very impressed by that. I belong to quite a few social media groups aimed at people who are struggling financially, partly because sometimes I go and ask for case studies for something I'm working on, and ask if people have seen, experienced this and that. But partly as well because sometimes I can genuinely offer a helping bit of advice, or I have a clearer understanding of certain benefits or laws, or the budget, things like that I can kind of share with people when they reach out for help. And again, I have just seen such incredible support from groups supporting people through universal credit. I've always been in some of these groups because I cover universal credit quite a lot. And then suddenly you had, what was it, sort of 4.4 million new universal credit applicants last year, or at the peak of the crisis. And people who'd never engaged with the benefits system before, suddenly trying to make sense of it, suddenly trying to understand what it meant for them, coming into these social media groups and being given incredible support, incredible help, and incredible reassurance that they're not alone, that this isn't something to be ashamed of. And I wonder if, perhaps I keep looking for bright spots in this pandemic, but I wonder if actually we're going to come through this better able to talk about having been in debt, or our businesses struggling or being on benefits, because it's been something that has encompassed everybody. I wrote an article at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, when the furlough scheme was launched, saying that we're all benefit claimants now. Millions of us are benefit claimants now, if you consider furlough to be a benefit. Perhaps that will change our attitudes to sort of receiving state help. And I think it's perhaps too early to say if that's the case or not. But I think that consistently, even through, though in this crisis we've been kept apart from each other, social media has been just such a huge positive. I've seen so many communities form and get each other through it. It's been incredible.
For once, there's an opportunity there for people to be able to, touch on it before, but share their experience to help others. And yeah, Excluded is a good example of that. And you see it. You see some of the difficulties that people are getting themselves into, and you also see a way in which there's an immediate response. And I think that's the advantage of social media, is its immediacy. You know, you're not having to send an email. You know,
yes,
people are there for you straight away, and that's really important. Is there something that you've embraced to sort of help with mental health and having these new invaders in your workspace? How's it worked for Fliss?
I shouldn't call my husband an invader, but yeah, this is the most time we've ever spent with each other ever. I think it is something to get used to. I think that I have been incredibly lucky to have been so busy with work in the last 12 months. I know that's added to some of the pressure that I'm under, trying to balance everything. But actually, it was the days when I didn't have anything to do that I stopped and fretted and found myself. I've always had quite robust mental health. I've been very, very fortunate in my life. But I remember months and months through the pandemic where I was grinding my teeth, which I've never done before. And that was always when I didn't have anything to distract me. So the more work I have had, the better able I have been to cope with everything that's going on, because not only has it been a distraction from just fretting about this thing I couldn't solve, couldn't do anything about, couldn't make any better, and was just anxious about, but also it gave me a real sense of purpose. I know that journalists, we're on the key worker list, and I know that we are not key workers in the way that nurses or bin men or the people at the supermarket are key workers. But I do think that what we've been doing is key work. We have been explaining and informing and holding people to account, and I think it has been crucial, and I've got a lot personally out of that.
Works. I mean, I would agree with you. I actually see, bizarrely, the last 12 months have probably been more productive than I've been in the previous 5. It's incredible, but I've tackled the things that I've not had time for before. I've not been able to get to. There's been a space where I've been able to get into it. But also, I think that for me, I have to do something. I used to do a lot of running. I've got an injury now, which means I can't, which I'll bore you with, but my legs just doesn't do that anymore. I did a Great North Run where I should have stopped after 2 miles and didn't. Bit of an idiot, really. But instead, I had to find something else that I could do. And I used to go to the gym. I used to exercise bikes and work out that way. And when the gyms closed down, I had to find something else. And I've now turned to yoga, believe it or not, and that is helping me. And I thought I'd stumbled across it was a really good one. I've just found I was trying all the different ones, and I found a young lady called Adrienne, which apparently she's hugely successful. So 9 million followers and subscribers. Wow. Both my daughters have been fans of hers for quite some time. So there's nothing new, but it was her ability to be able to convey to the people that are taking the classes, and in a very sensible, very personable way, which sort of draws you in, and then you're able to. And I feel personally, because of the quality of her teaching, I've been able to improve my fitness and to be able to do better. So actually finding something like that has really helped. I mean, I would argue as well, I can be, my family would testify, I can be a workaholic. And I think there are times when, because of lockdown, that's what you fill your time and your space with. And I think that's a danger as well. I think there's an awful lot of people who have found themselves working longer hours, doing more, filling that.
Yes, absolutely. That is the other great danger of all this working from home, isn't it? I was talking to a journalist I know the other day who they live in a fairly compact flat, but they have had to give up one of their rooms for being in after work, because they have to have it as a work room so that they can shut the door on it at the end of the day, because otherwise they say it's it just spills over into every aspect of their lives. And certainly, I mean, I've always checked work emails late at night and sent, and I quite often find myself sort of working on the sofa in the evening. So I've always been pretty bad for that. But I think that I think this is something that businesses are going to have to if they're going to allow their staff to work from home, they're going to have to think about how they manage that, because otherwise people will burn out. So I expect we're seeing quite a lot of that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of well-being programs, mindfulness, thoughts about what staff are actually going through. I mean, I've heard some not so good stories, and I've heard some very positive stories about how some companies are doing that. Have you had some success stories on Wake Up to Money, some companies that are actually dealing with this, tackling it and doing it well?
I think that among the businesses I've spoken to for Wake Up to Money and for any other of my journalism, I have consistently been impressed, actually, that employee well-being has been absolutely key to everybody I've spoken to. In fact, every boss I've spoken to, and maybe this is because I'm speaking to small businesses, and I'm sure that there are some bad examples out there, but everybody I've spoken to, their main concern has been, how are they able to look after their staff? Are they able to keep their staff in a job? Do they have to let some of their staff go? Are their staff getting the hours that they need? Will the furlough scheme be long enough to kind of get their staff through this? I think there's been a huge focus on staff, and perhaps some of that focus necessarily over the last months has been about just the sheer survival aspect. Can I keep paying my staff a wage? Will the government help me keep paying my staff a wage? And perhaps as we come out of this now, it's going to be more of a focus on, the actual staff well-being, the actual how is it going to be as they come back to work, if they're coming back to the office, or there are people out there who've been furloughed pretty much full time for a year, and how do you bring those people back into work? I mean, I didn't even take time off work really when I had my 3 babies. I have always, I love work, and I've always just sort of been straight back into it and had a little bit and then built it back up. I cannot imagine how hard it would be if you've been off for a year to try and come back. And I think that kind of well-being issue is going to be a big focus for employers.
Yeah, I wrote a piece, I do an employment law update as part of HReSource, and I wrote a piece about the camps, if you like. And the image I used was West Side Story, which is maybe a little bit extreme, but I was getting the point across. The idea of those that are furloughed and those that have continued to work all the way through, there's a little bit of antagonistic thoughts between the two, because if you've been furloughed, those that are still at work will probably have found themselves having to do more work and maybe not been paid more, and have perhaps had their conditions not so great. Whilst the people, and they're thinking about the people on furlough as just, well, you've had it easy, you've been paid and you haven't had to do anything.
Being on holiday.
Whereas that's a very stressful period to be in, because if you're one of the furloughed, you're on the subs bench, you're not on the pitch. So where's your future lying? And so a decision has been taken, and you can have all sorts of things going in your mind, and things can spiral. So there's been that added stress. And also without that thing you were talking about, being busy kept your mind focused on things that were more positive. So without that being busy, where does the mind go? So I think, those people who are furloughed are looking at those people who work with some jealousy, thinking, well, you were one of the chosen individuals to do it. So there's that. And getting those two groups together to be able to work effectively together, that's a challenge for businesses, but I think they need to spend time doing it and doing it well, because otherwise they're going to have a fractious time for the first few months, as and when people do obviously get back together. I want to really just now think about the success. Let's end on a high with this. What are some of the success stories that we've had coming through? I mean, I know you've got a personal interest in the little brick company Lego. They do quite well.
Lego have been doing incredible, even with their they had their results out the other week, and I can't remember exactly how much, but their profits were hugely up, and I don't think that's just me, but yes, Lego have been one of the success stories. It's quite nice, actually. I think that's been a surge in board game sales. I mean, I'm a data geek. I love looking at sort of sales and shopping habits data, because I think that it tells a very human story. It looks like quite bland data, and it's a really kind of rich insight. So I know that there was some Mintel research out last week that showed that we've been buying less deodorant last year, which I love. And yeah, I know that there was some data last year that showed ice cream sales were up, shampoo sales were down, and Lego sales are up. I mean, I have always spent a small fortune on Lego, because we're a Lego family. I've got 3 boys, and they're all completely addicted. And actually, I have my own Lego collection as well. And
Well,
I think
I got my wife for Mother's Day. She was very pleased with.
that is a beautiful minifig. I'll send you a picture later. I have a whole display cabinet of my favorite women Lego minifigs. In fact, every time my boys get a Lego minifig that's a woman, they don't put her in your cabinet, because I collect them. But yeah, I think the one challenge I actually have as a parent is that, because I couldn't take my children anywhere or give them the experiences that I wanted to give them, I have bought them so much more stuff last year. And I'm very conscious that, that's a very privileged thing to say. I'm somebody who's been in work throughout this year, and a lot of people are having a tough time. But for those of us who have been in work or have been furloughed, where money hasn't been the issue, and we've actually been saving money because we've been staying home, not able to go out to restaurants, not able to go on holidays, we've had sort of more disposable cash. I can't be the only one that has just bought my kids more Lego, more magazines, more books, more, because I want them to have these enjoyable experiences. And I think coming out of lockdown, I need to get that under control, because I don't want them to expect new stuff all the time. I want them to expect experiences. Yeah, exactly. We've bought a lot of Lego. I hope it holds its value.
I just hope you have to walk around with particularly thick rubber-soled slippers, so you don't sort of do that horrible standing on the Lego thing.
Do you know, I stood on a Lego minifig of Dobby the house elf the other day, and I don't know if you've seen the Lego minifig of Dobby. His nose is just a spike. It is just created to pierce feet. So yeah, it's a constant hazard.
Oh dear. But the idea that businesses have been able to be successful, I think, is something that we shouldn't overlook, because obviously there's been a lot of negativity around COVID. And I think in terms of positive stories, I think it's something we should try and focus on and look to more innovation and more creativity, because I think that can be difficult. That can be a challenge. Certainly, trying to do a brainstorming session on Zoom is difficult. And maybe that's where the VR comes into it.
I've been so impressed by small businesses in this crisis. I know, because they're smaller and they're hungrier, they innovate faster. But I've just seen such incredible agility from so many small business owners. Restaurants pivoting to national food deliveries. There's one in London, Clay's Kitchen, which I think was just a normal sort of curry house before the pandemic, and now they're delivering across the UK, and you have to book it weeks in advance because there is so much demand, and it's very, very good. And there's just all sorts of examples like that with these small business owners who could have simply hung up their boots in this pandemic and said, well, how are we supposed to get through this? And instead they have done such incredible things where their business can kind of pivot to some new direction, and it's been incredibly, incredibly impressive.
Chris, this has been wonderful, and I appreciate you have a school run to real life. It's a mother of 3 young children and multitasking brilliantly as you do. We haven't even got into the times you have to get up to in the middle of the night for wake up to money. That's just very impressive. One thing I would like you to think about, as far as our audience is concerned, if there's any piece of advice that you've been given in your career or insights that you think has helped you that might help people who are listening right now.
I think, I suppose my experience is very, very journalism focused, but I have never ever reached out. God, that's awful speak, isn't it? I've never ever got in touch with someone I admire and regretted it. I have had help and advice, or even just a nod of encouragement from all sorts of people at the top of their game, because particularly when I was younger, I got in touch, I emailed them or I tweeted them, or I even sometimes picked up the phone to them and just asked, hi, I'm new and I'm trying to accomplish this, and I really admire you because of these reasons. And what advice do you have for me? And I don't think I've ever been turned down. I have had so much good advice and help and pointers and support that way. And now it's something that I try and do for aspiring journalists when they come to me, which they very often do. They come and ask if they can do remote work experience. I've done quite a bit of that in lockdown, and I'm sort of trying to pay on the favors that I definitely benefited from when I was younger. So I think that I assume this works across all industries. I think whatever industry you're in, if there's someone that you admire, if there's someone who's doing the thing that you want to be doing, get in touch. Everyone loves to hear that you admire them, and they'll want to share their insights and their, you know, their journey and see what you can learn from them. So I think it's always worth, you know, looking up at where you want to be and then talking to the people who are already there and saying, how do I get there?
Yeah, don't be shy. I think that's, you know, and it concerns me to a certain extent with being the father of, I'm actually 3 quite outgoing young adults now, but each of them, I think, reflect the generation, the sort of Gen Y, Gen Z. This sort of reluctance perhaps to pick up the phone and deal with that type of technology in a way that is more than just a text or a WhatsApp message. So I'm with you. I think there is reaching out to people and having a conversation which could result in supporting them is not necessarily going to be something that puts somebody out. If it's couched in the right way, it's actually an endorsement and a bit of an ego boost for somebody who's
yes.
dealing with life in a particularly different way and maybe wants to be able to be a little more altruistic with time and offer support. That's a great tip. I'm fully endorse it, and it's something that I've also done in my years. When I look back now, and one of the things that I did, and it's on my list of to-dos, one of the things I did is I reached out. See, I'm doing it as well now. It's a new phrase. To my first really outstanding boss, was a lady called Jackie Elliott, and she was my boss, my first marketing role at Thomas Cook, and I was there for no more than about 12 months, certainly no more than 8, about 12 months, but she taught me so much. She gave me the inspiration. She led me into taking a marketing degree and blah, 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 blah. But that was the catalyst. And I'd lost touch with her. You know, when she left the company, that was it. And I used the Thomas Cook alumni, and I've managed to track people down, and I've pieced things together, and we've made connections. So we're going to have a conversation this week. And I just think it's worth telling somebody in that situation, actually, do you know what? You really helped me. So there's a number of things that I think that can help people, because you never know what's going on in their life at that particular moment, but it'd be nice to hear an affirmation that what they did for your career was something really quite positive.
I agree. I think that, you know, there's a saying that you never forget a good teacher, but actually you never forget a good boss either, particularly a good boss early on in your career who kind of gives you that self-confidence and those pointers and motivation.
Felicity Hannah, thank you very much for your time today. I know it's very valuable because you are so busy, and greatly appreciated. And I'm sure the audience is going to find an awful lot of what you said very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.